Welcome back to another episode of History with Richard. This is going to be a little bonus episode. Remember, in the last one we were left with Francisco Pizarro sort of sailing down the coast, the north Ecuadorian coast, down to the Inca Empire. But let's just pause there for a moment, because I found out something at a trivia night yesterday that I had to make a little video about. And it's the origins of vanilla, the vanilla bean, you know, the beloved vanilla ice cream that a lot of people consume on a weekly basis. So, the vanilla plant, I think it's an orchid, although a botanist can correct me. If my mum watches this video, she can tell me if I'm wrong with that. I'm pretty sure it's an orchid, and it's native to, would you believe it, the Americas. So, with the sort of European takeover of that region, they eventually discovered that there's this vanilla bean. They don't discover it, obviously. The local people, indigenous people, have probably been using this bean for ages. I'm not actually sure exactly what they would have used it for, or if they used it for something. I'm sure they did. Again, someone can tell me in the comments. All I really know is that it's from this region. And the crazy thing that I learned in this trivia was, so the question in the trivia was, what country produces the most vanilla in the world? And I sort of had an inkling that it might be from this region, so I said Brazil, thinking that, you know, it was either from Brazil or it was from the Americas, and now Brazil's a big country and they can grow a lot of it. The answer is, again, as with a lot of things on this earth, a lot stranger than that. The answer is Madagascar, an island on my beloved African continent. I was born in Cape Town originally. Even though I'm white, I don't know if it's politically correct to say, I feel African at heart. And Madagascar never gets any airtime, so I'm going to give it some today. It produces 80% apparently of the world's vanilla. So how did the vanilla plant get all the way from the Americas to Madagascar? The only two empires I've really talked about, European anyway, that come to the Americas so far have been mainly the Spanish, because remember the Portuguese were sailing around Africa and stuff and going to the Spice Islands, which I'll have to make lots of videos about. That's very, very interesting part of history. But yeah, we've got the Spanish in the, let's just say, call it the Caribbean. Later we have also the French, the Dutch, and the British, okay? So the French are also there. A lot of, I don't know if any of you have been to the Caribbean. I'm sure some people watching this have. There are islands in the Caribbean like Martinique, Guadeloupe, like French islands, Saint Martin. And they hear about this vanilla plant, and they somehow get the vanilla plant all the way to, this is by about the 18th century, early 1800s. There's vanilla plants in the island of, let's see if I can find it here. Actually don't know what it's, I think it's still called Reunión. Here it is, yeah, right off the coast. I knew it was somewhere in the Indian Ocean. Reunión. So there's a French island, French-controlled island that they've, you know, taken over from local people there. Interestingly, the people of the Indian Ocean who live on Madagascar, Malagasy people, as far as we know, the first humans ever to come to this island did not come from Africa, although, you know, maybe they did and went extinct or all died off. The Malagasy people of today are actually a genetic lineage from Indonesia. That's crazy. So there were boats from Indonesia that went all the way, settled on a lot of these islands like Reunión, and became the Malagasy people. Anyway, French control Reunión in the early 1800s, and there's vanilla growing there. However, they can't, none of these plants can sort of pass on their DNA to the next generation of plants. If the plant dies, there's no new seedlings, because the pollinator, the bee that pollinates vanilla, cannot live in Reunión. It is only found in Mexico. and the Caribbean. So there's a bit of a problem with trying to grow vanilla anywhere that isn't Mexico. So how they didn't bring the bee, I'll give you a hint, they didn't bring the bee over to Madagascar. How the hell did Madagascar start growing all of this vanilla? And again, we have a super weird thing that happened. That, look, I hope that, you know, big vanilla ice cream brands and stuff know this. I'm sure they don't, but they really should market this a bit more. There was a 12-year-old enslaved boy named, let me double check his name on the computer here because I want to get it right. He was called Edmond Albius, apparently. And he was an enslaved boy on Reunión, 12 years old, under, you know, a French slave master or something. And he figures out how to hand-pollinate the vanilla plant at 12 years old. I don't know if he was just some, you know, botanical genius or if he was just messing around, but this guy, this little boy figured out how to pollinate and thus, you know, propagate vanilla, the famous vanilla bean that we now, you know, consume so much of. Although I think a lot of vanilla now is synthetic. A friend of me told me that, and I'm inclined to believe him. I haven't checked it out yet, but I think it's true. Anyway, he figures out how to pollinate vanilla by hand, and he uses like a little stick or a little blade of grass. Apparently there's again, I'm not an expert on flowers, but there's a part of the flower that separates the male and the female anatomy, and he lifts this little piece of the flower and he cross-pollinates, does it by hand. And this technique, developed by 12-year-old enslaved boy, Edmond Albius, is still used for every single vanilla plant on Madagascar. So there are people going around hand-pollinating every single flower for 80% of the world's vanilla production. Again, really random video, but I just think it's an awesome thing that we, you know, should know about vanilla. Actually, let's see if, I'm going to quickly look up if most of the vanilla we consume today is synthetic. Let's see, I'm sure the ice cream brands use the cheapest available thing. Wow. Not vetted at all, this source, but up to 99% of the vanilla we consume globally is now synthetic. Crazy. Okay, so here we go. So if you're a proper baker at home and you're buying pure vanilla extract, that's coming from this hand-pollinated vanilla in Madagascar. And if you're just eating, you know, bulla ice cream, vanilla ice cream, they can make a compound called vanillin. Shout out to my friend Nick, who, you know, was onto this already, said, no, we consume synthetic vanilla, and oof. The source for that is not pretty. Apparently it's petroleum and wood pulp. Great. So we have you know, there's probably a lot of problems with, you know, vanilla farming in Madagascar. I'm not completely across that, but I'm sure it's a lot better than getting, you know, a petrochemical source or a source that involves logging. But who knows? Maybe the petrol vanilla is better for the planet than the hand-pollinated vanilla from Madagascar. But shout out to Edmond Albius, that poor 12-year-old enslaved boy. He actually died in poverty. He was never compensated for his discovery that I'm sure made obscene amounts of money for a lot of French merchants, probably his slave master. Yeah, the world sucks in many ways. The history of the world is a brutal place, but shout out to Edmond Albius and stay curious, guys. See you on the next one.